Okay, it seems to be working. All right, everyone. It's really nice to see everyone. Thanks for coming to another fine seminar series. I have a couple of introductory things to say, and then we'll get started with our first seminar for this semester. First off, if you check in the chat, there's a new is it Blue Sky account? I have to admit I'm not up on these things. It's in the chat that you can access information about the fine. Carson, does that look correct?
Yes, it's okay. That's correct.
Thank you. All right, so again, thanks for being here. For those of you here in the Zoom link, and also those of you watching on YouTube, my name is Lauren Hayes. I'm one of the hosts of the Fine Seminar Series, and I'm really happy to be hosting this week and excited to have another seminar start up. And if I did my math correctly, I think Um, this is the 10th iteration of the Fine Seminar Series. And personally, I want to thank the hosts who have, worked really hard at this, Karsten, Adriana, and Eduardo. They're exceptional colleagues, and really this has been a fantastic run. And also thank all of you who have been coming. Obviously, we wouldn't have it if people didn't attend, and so we're really thankful to have everyone here week after week. And then there are a couple of folks behind the scenes who have been doing a lot of work for us. I just want to acknowledge them. Lindalani Makue, Dr. Makue, has been helping out a lot with getting hosts or getting speakers and has done some of the social media work, I believe, has been really helpful to us. And I want to thank her. And then Facunda Fernandez Duque has done a lot with particularly helping us with the website, keeping it up to date, making it look fantastic, and want to thank him for his work. Um, so there are folks behind the scenes that are doing a lot of things to make this happen. For the new people, I just want to kind of go over a couple of things. We're really glad that new people are coming. We want to continue to build community. The way this works is we do about a 45-minute seminar, and then at the end, we have a discussion that can go up to about, usually we stop at around quarter of one, 10 of one. And in that, when you ask questions, please just post a question mark in the chat. You don't have to put the whole question, just a question mark. And as moderator, I will check and then forward those questions to Hal. And if you're on YouTube, we want to hear you, and one of us will be monitoring YouTube, and we'll actually ask your question for you. Um, what else? As you see in the chat, there's the thanks to everyone for putting Adriana for reposting it. There's a link to the Blue Sky account if you want to access information in that way. Um, our series this semester, whatever we want to call it, I'm going to pull it up here. Our 10th season is pretty exciting, I think. Hopefully everyone can see this okay. Adriana, can we see this okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Not
Looks good.
likely, yeah.
Thank you.
Think so, but yeah.
So this is our series. We're starting with Hal Whitehead today, who I'll introduce momentarily. Next week, we have Jonathan Henshaw. He's going to be talking about parental care. We then take a short break because most of the US side is on holiday. Then we have Vincent Formica from Swarthmore College, which is a small college in Pennsylvania, talking about beetle societies. Mickey Pardue is going to be talking about elephant vocal communication. Camille Testard will be talking about neuroethology and sociality. And then we have in mid-April, early April, we'll have the Fine organizing team is going to talk about the past, future, and present of Fine, and we're working on what that actually is going to be. We'll send updates later. We then have talks by Mike Webster, M. Kowalewski, I don't know M's first name, apologize. Isabella Cappellini, Eli Strauss, Aaron Syracusa, and then we end up with Jeff White talking about sociality and lizards. This all should be on the website. We also, those of you obviously are on the email list. If you have people who want to join the email list, just let us know and we'll send this around so everyone's up to date. So let me find my way out of here. So with that, I want to introduce our speaker for this week, who I'm really excited to have Hal Whitehead with us today. Um, I know we're all excited to hear about his work with marine mammals. Hal doesn't really need an introduction, I don't think, but I'll give him one as best I can. Hal is a professor at Dalhousie University in Canada. He actually told me this morning, it was really interesting to learn, he had a background in mathematics and then found himself in a PhD program at Cambridge University, where really that allowed him, gave him the flexibility to work mathematics into his research, which is really interesting and exciting. Um, the Whitehead lab at Dalhousie has been really productive, as you can imagine. I did a Google search, and there's over 300 papers coming out of his lab group in great journals, things like PNAS scientific reports, lots of behavior journals, mammal journals, and obviously the marine mammal journals as well. Hugely influential on our thinking about marine mammals and also on sociality in particular. And some of you may know Hal from the program that he developed with Sosh Prague, which is free to all of us. And I can speak for my colleague Luis. I mean, we use it regularly to help us determine social groups of the Degus in Chile. And so it's been a really influential program that many people have used. I believe there's a link to it on his website if you're interested in learning more about it and using it. Um, his work, as I said, has been influential. His work has been cited over 30,000 times, um, and has an H10 index of 274. So people are really using his work to inform their own and other areas. Um, and so with that, I'm not going to say much more because I don't want to take up too much more time. I'm just going to say that really happy to have you here with us, Hal. And today, Hal's going to be talking about sperm whale clans and human societies. And with that, I'll turn it over to Hal for today. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Here we go. And just thank you, Lauren, and thank you all. Can you see my first slide?
It looks good on my end.
And people can hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be invited to take part in this wonderful series that you've developed. I'm kind of excited to tell you about the sperm whales. And some of the ideas which have come to us decades ago, and some others which came to us in the last few months. So I'm going to try and put it together. And it's based around a paper I published about a year ago in Royal Society Open Science, which I enjoyed writing. And I'll talk a little bit about what led to me writing it. The main stimulus was, of course, sperm whale. So what I'm going to do today is introduce you to the sperm whale briefly, and then talk about the sperm whale clans, which have been the main focus of my interest in them for the last 20 odd years. And then bring in some new ideas about what a society is, and the idea of an anonymous society and how sperm whales fit that. And then perhaps make a big leap to think about sperm whale clans and human societies, and potential parallels and as well as contrasts. And then I will start looking at this potential the parallel from two directions. First, given the huge academic effort and the availability of sometimes really good information about human prehistory and the evolution of human societies, what can we learn from that as we think about what may be happening with the sperm whales? And secondly, much more briefly, the other way around. Has sperm whales have anything that might be of useful to people interested in human social evolution? Okay, so first, sperm whale, and we have called it the animal of extremes, and I think this is fair. If you ask a kid to draw a whale, it might look like a sperm whale, but it doesn't look like most whales because the sperm whale does not look like most whales. It's very different. It's the most phylogenetically divergent species of all extant cetaceans. It's big, largest tooth animal, and with that comes the biggest brain on Earth and the largest nose on Earth. About a quarter to a third of its body is this massive nose, which, after a lot of deliberation over centuries about what this thing was for, it turns out it's primarily an extraordinarily powerful and precise sonar system. It makes the highest sound pressure of any animal. And this gives it an enormous potential perspective on the resources deep down in the ocean. And so with this ability, sperm whales are successful, if you consider success in terms of eating a lot. And the current sperm whale population, which has been reduced by maybe half by whaling, eats nearly as much as all human fisheries combined. All those factory freezer trawlers and all the other nets and things we put out there get only a little bit more than the world's sperm whale population. But it has all kinds of other weird things, like it has the greatest sexual segregation of any animal. The females and young are in the tropics and subtropics, and the mature males are very largely in polar and subpolar waters. I'm not going to talk much about males, but if people want to ask me about them, I will. We have been focused on the females for reasons which I hope will become apparent. The sperm whales, when I first started studying them a bit over 40 years ago, we were doing it to try and show we could study them, because an argument of the whalers was that you have to kill sperm whales, otherwise we would know nothing about them. So we were just trying to find anything about them. But as we did it, I and also my colleagues became entranced by the social world of the sperm whales. So first, a little bit about how we study them. This is how we studied them. We go out in a 40-foot research boat, usually with a crew of about 5. We're out for 2 to 3 weeks, and we follow groups of sperm whales around as they live their lives. And we can follow a group of sperm whales for up to 2 weeks continuously. And we do this using passive acoustics. We just listen for their sounds and head the boat off in the direction that we hear them. My favorite study site, we've studied them in a few other places, but my favorite study site is off the Galapagos Islands, and this is our research vessel off the Galapagos. Things haven't changed. Those of us who do long-term studies have this huge dilemma about how much to bring in new techniques and how much to keep the old stuff going because of comparability. Well, that picture there was taken in 1995, And we were there a couple of years ago, and it was more or less the same Galapagos in the background, sperm whales in the front, and that's the same research vessel, different grad students, but otherwise pretty much the same. One thing that has changed, or maybe I should first say what we do. We collect the sounds, and we collect photo identifications, so we can identify individual sperm whales. We collect sloughed skin and occasionally, in the Galapagos, sloughed skin for genetic analyses, and we collect poops to see what they've been eating. The one really great recent piece of technology we've brought in are drones. And this has really changed our perspective on the animals. So we get a picture like this, and from the boat, you're just seeing a few bits of whale popping up in rather odd, hard to figure out ways. From the drone, you really see what's going on. And so my long-term interest in sociality has been suddenly broadened a lot. So now one of the PhD students I study, Anna, whose picture this is doing a whole thesis on touch in sperm whales, something we could never really look at before. But they're clearly very social, especially when you look at them from above like this. However, this has to be seen within the context of social structure. And the foundation of the social structure is what we call the social unit, which is about 10 females and their offspring. It's matrilineally based, so most females stay in the same social unit they were born in for their lives. The social units move together. They can move 1,000 kilometers or so. Then these are largely nomadic animals. We have social units who've moved from the Gulf of California to the Galapagos, which is 4,000 kilometers. So they're moving together. As they're doing this, they babysit for each other. Each female is making 40-minute dives to depths of about 600 to 1,000 meters to eat. And the calves can't do this for this long. They're left at the surface. And there's often an adult with them or a juvenile. And the babysitting is deliberate. They seem to stagger their dives to provide better coverage. They also suckle each other's young. So unlike other whales and dolphins, if you see a young whale beside an adult, and even suckling from that adult, it is not necessarily the mother. They defend themselves communally against killer whales. We believe these social units are important for information exchange. They do a lot of things communally. And I suspect that in areas such as the Galapagos, where the environment changes dramatically over scales of a few years because of El Nino, that information is really important. And very recently, in the past few weeks, we have information that there's some communal benefit, foraging benefit to being in groups. So individuals in the bigger groups have higher foraging success. There's also almost no sign of aggression, either within social units or between social units. And I have been with sperm whales now for off and on for 40 years and virtually no sign of it, which I link to some features of the open ocean where things are hard to defend. However, even though the social unit is the fundamental part of sperm whale social structure, if you're out there, you may see a lot more than 10 animals. So here's one of Anna's drone pictures There's about 60 sperm whales in this picture. So maybe about 800 tons of sperm whale just in one picture from a mini drone. And as you look here, you can, well, as I look here, I can say, oh, I wonder if that's a social unit, that's a social unit, or maybe what's going on here. Well, I mean, it's completely fascinating to me. But we've, even before we got these drone pictures, we began to get some clues as to what was going on. And these was triggered by studies of what are called coders. Rather inappropriately called coders. Coders are patterned series of clicks, usually between 3 and 12 clicks, that the sperm whales make at the surface. They're using this same wonderful sonar nose that they use at depth to find food, but they are adapting it. So these clicks aren't as loud, and unlike the sonar clicks, are not highly directional. They spread all around. So this, I hope, is what they sound like. These are some sperm whale coders. And that's quite typical. There were actually 2 sperm whales making coders back and forth to each other. And then at the end, they overlaid them right on top of each other as a sort of, as some aspects of a duet. In 2001, Luke Rendell and I made what we think was our big discovery. When we looked at the coda patterns being made by the different social units we knew from the Galapagos. So Luke categorized the coders and saw which categories were made by which of the social units, or by which groupings of which social units. So this was our input to the sperm whale clans, because this is what we found. So in this diagram, the columns are the different social units. So the first one is social unit A, about 10 females and immatures. And then further along, there's L, another one. And then there's E and P, that's a group of social unit E with social unit P. So those are the columns. The rows are the different coders. So the top one, 3R, is just click, click, click. Further down, we can see 3+1, click, 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 click. And when you do it like this, a pattern comes out. So the dots here indicate which social units make which coders. And a circle, unfilled, means that social unit made that coda. A filled one means it was over 10% of the repertoire. And when it was portrayed like this, we suddenly saw something which fascinated us then and still does. All the social units and groups of social units in green makes coders which tend to have a regular pattern. 5R, 5 regularly spaced clicks, 6R, 7R, 8R. Then if you look to the right, you see a bunch of social units which have a blue line at the top. And they make coders like 4+1, 4 clicks, a space, and then another click, 5+1, and so on. And then there's unit T at the end, who's completely weird. And when we found these different repertoires, and they are consistent between years for the same social unit, we followed terminology used by the killer whale people and called them clans. And we were very original. This is the regular clan, and this one is the +1 clan. Then we went back into our data set and looked how that fitted with other elements of the sperm whale's life. So this is a social network diagram. The little squares and circles are individuals. The ones who were seen a lot together are linked. And the bigger circles are show which are the social units. So there are 8 at the top, 8 social units who some form groups with each other. There's 5 at the bottom who do also form groups with each other, but they never, in all our time, have formed groups between these 2 clans. So if we add to this the acoustic diagram, so these are the same social units. We only get the recordings at the level of the social unit, not the individual. There's a lot of links among the top ones as well as among the bottoms, but very little similarity between the codas of the top set of social units and the bottom. So these are the regular clan and the +1 clan, and a regular coda and a +1 coda with a slight delay before the last click. So what we had here was a population divided into 2 main clans with distinct vocalizations. And although they can both be found off the Galapagos, sometimes at the same time, they never associate with each other. We then looked at the genetics. In the mitochondrial DNA, there are differences between the clans. They're not absolute, but the distribution of haplotypes is different between the regular clan and the +1 clan, which indicates that females generally, but not quite always, probably stay within the clan they were born. For nuclear DNA, there is absolutely no difference between the clans. In fact, there's less difference than one would expect at random, which may be because the males are mating across clans, but we don't know that for sure yet. We've looked at various other potential differences between the clans, and I'm just going to briefly summarize a few of them. First, what one might call micro distributions, although this is on a micro scale for sperm whales. These are the Galapagos Islands. The space bar is 100 kilometers. So these squares, I think, are about 5 kilometers square. But the regular clan are found closer to the islands, and the +1 generally a bit further, although there is some overlap. The movements are really quite different. This has a log scale on the y-axis, and over time scales from about 6 hours to several years, a +1 unit has gone very much further, almost twice as far as a regular clan unit. We've looked at feeding success, and we do this by using the defecation rate because we can't watch them eating 1,000 meters below the surface, but we can look for brown patches when they dive, and on the basis that what went out must have gone in, we use defecation rate as a proxy for feeding success. Now, if you look on the right, 1989 was a cool, normal year off the Galapagos, pretty productive. But the regular clan had about 3 or 4 times the defecation rate of the +1 clan, and there's almost no overlap on a daily basis between the two. In 1987, an El Nino year, life is hard in the oceans for sperm whales and pretty much everything else. The regular clan, the median was on most days we followed them, no shit at all. The +1, though, did shit, not as much as they did in the normal year, but quite a lot more than the regular clan. So this points to a differential feeding success with clan. Productive success is different. The +1 clan, the ones that move faster, straighter, and do better in the bad conditions, every group that we followed had a calf with them. With the regular clan, it was only about half of them. And Maurizio Cantor, who I think has talked with you guys for his PhD, looked at various social differences between the clans. And one of the most interesting is dive synchrony, because diving synchronously is not good for babysitting. So the less synchronous you are, the better the babysitting, which suggests here that the +1 clan provide a better babysitting service than the regular clan. We've looked at a few other things, but these are the main ones we found. So our discoveries were made mainly off the Galapagos, a little bit off mainland Ecuador to the east. But since we came up with this, people have found clans, 2 or more clans in the same area in Chile, in the Caribbean, of Brazil, of Mauritius, and Japan. So this seems to be a general feature of sperm whale life. And Taylor Hersh, during her PhD, put together a consortium of people who had recordings of sperm whales from right across the Pacific, from Japan to Chile, from British Columbia to New Zealand, and looked at the clan structure. She found 7 clans across the entire Pacific. It's marked here which clan was found where. We have much the best data from the Galapagos, and that indicates that many of these clans, but not all, have been found in the Galapagos. This is really interesting to me, this map Taylor produced. If there are about 7 clans in the Pacific, there are about 150,000 female sperm whales in the Pacific, which suggests about 20,000 females per clan. So these are very large social structures. And interestingly, again, if you look at this, you can see the colors are pretty mixed up. A lot of places, there's 2 or more clans have been found. But it varies a lot between clans. The short clan, that was the strange unit T, if you remember on the diagram I showed, was the first short clan unit we ever met off the Galapagos. They are found the whole way across the Pacific. In contrast, the +1 clan, the one I played, one of the 2 that we have really good Galapagos data for, is only been heard, has never been heard anywhere except Galapagos and neighboring mainland Ecuador. So the short clan has a span of 10,000 kilometers, the +1 maybe 1,000 kilometers. And so I would suspect there's a lot more than 20,000 females in the short clan and a lot less in the +1 clan. But the scales are even more dramatic when you look a bit more broadly. We have also done studies in the Caribbean, and a little teeny blue box, which you may not be able to see, has appeared on the very right of that diagram. That is our Caribbean study area. It is the Lesser Antilles blown up here. So the scale, 100 kilometers is the bar, which is tiny compared with the Pacific picture on the left. And we expected the 2 major clans in this area to be well mixed up, as we'd find in the Pacific over these kinds of scales, but it's not that way. Felicia Vachon, in her PhD work, found that the two clans are very well separated on this micro scale. So off Dominica, where most of the research has been done by Shane Giro and his colleagues, including us, it's almost all the EC1 clan. And for a long time, we believed there was only one clan in the Caribbean because we had only studies from Dominica, but we thought they traveled so far. If there are others, we'd know about it. But then Shane started hearing another clan there, the EC2, very occasionally. You only know 2 social units from it, and they didn't come very often. What Felicia found that if you just go to the neighboring island, Martinique, which you can see from Dominica, it's entirely EC2 or nearly entirely, and none are EC1. But then if you go further down the chain to St. Vincent, you're back in EC1 territory. So things are pretty weird, and we've got a lot more to learn. Now, Taylor and Shane are putting together a global clan paper, which will show what we know for the whole world, but it'll be particularly interesting for the North Atlantic, where there's a lot of data, fairly interesting for the South Atlantic, where there's some, and there is also some information for the Indian Ocean. There are also other contrasts between the Atlantic and Pacific, and the one that I find most peculiar is this. Now, I've talked about the different clans in the Pacific, the regular, the +1, and these are what we call their identity coders, the ones that they make very often and other clans make very rarely. And they are based on motifs, the regular motif, the +1 motif, and the one I like best, the palindrome, which is a coda that's more or less the same if you play it forwards or backwards. Whereas in the Atlantic, the clans that we know tend to make one coda pretty much all the time. Although there's several for the EC1, they are really just temporal variants of the 1 + 1 + 3, click, 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 click. So the way clan is identified, communicated, or just presented seems to be different in the 2 oceans. Furthermore, when Taylor looked at her data for the Pacific and compared the coda usage similarity, so how often they made the same coders as each other, for those identity coders, what happens is that clans who overlap a lot, are found often in the same area, have less similarity than clans which are far apart and probably rarely run into each other. This is not the same for the non-identity coders, which are made pretty much evenly by everyone. So this indicates that identity coders are symbolic markers of clan identity. People who have looked at symbolic markers in humans use this as one of the criteria, that where 2 different societies are in close contact, they tend to have symbolic markers which are separate from each other. And we see the same for sports teams. If 2 sports teams in the same town are both unlikely to have the same color outfits. So, sperm whale clans, they have characteristic behavior, which seems to be learned from the mother, the social unit, maybe other social units in the clan. They delineate social relationships, and they seem to be a fundamental element of sperm whale life. As we look more into it, so much seems to be related to which clan an animal is a member of. So we study sperm whale clans, first to understand sperm whales, and secondly, as a model for how cultural evolution can work in a non-human species. And there, apart from being way out there in the open ocean, there are some advantages to sperm whales in this endeavor. First, that because the clans are very similar in nuclear genes, genetics is not supported as a driving differences between the behavior of the different clans. And similarly, because they're found in the same place, neither is the environment. So this gets rid of one of the problems that has so bedeviled some, say, people who study chimpanzee culture and trying to figure out which is culture, which is genetics, which is environment. I'm now going to move on to an idea which came to my attention last year. And it's from a Target article by Mark Moffat in Behavioral and Brain Science. And I and many others have been very loose with what we meant by society. I wrote a kind of textbook on social analysis and suggested it was a synonym for social structure or social organization. But Mark did something I thought was very cool and came up with an idea which gives society something really special and something we can really use. We can use because it's probably really important to the animals. A society, according to Mark Moffat, is a group whose constituent individuals recognize one another as members. So each one, they know so-and-so is a member, so-and-so isn't a member. And he added, and that maintain control over access to a physical space. I didn't like that last part. And in our commentary, Sam Walmsley and I suggested that be deleted. In the marine world, especially in the deep ocean, there's very little territoriality, or probably none, except on the bottom. And but we think there are societies, important societies, who fit into the first part of his definition. I haven't seen Moffat's rebuttal yet, but I think he sort of gets it, because there are cases like this, like gelada baboons on land, which aren't particularly territorial, if I've got the right primate. So he then has another really neat idea, and comes with the idea of anonymous societies. So you can have a society which would include probably chimp groups, where individuals do know who is in their group and who is not in their group, but they know the ones in their group individually. They know that Susie, she's part of my group. But in an anonymous societies, the members do not recognize each other individually. They know so-and-so is a member of my group, so-and-so isn't, but they don't have the individual recognition. To do this, you need a symbolic marker. You need something that allows them to do this. Moffat makes a nice case that in some invertebrates, this can be done chemically. That there's some chemical marker these guys have and those guys don't, and they can use that. But that doesn't really work very well, as far as I know, for most vertebrates. So in vertebrates, they would tend to be cultural symbols, things they're learning from each other, and produce something that they can recognize and say, that is us or that is not us. And because of this, these anonymous societies seem to be quite rare. So I'm now going to get to, maybe that was pretty controversial, but this one gets more so. Parallels and contrasts with human society. So the sperm whale clans are remarkable in how many individuals are in the clan, in the spatial spread of the clans. These clans form social barriers, and they're anonymous, or they seem to be, with symbolic marking. So that members may never meet, but they would recognize shared or not shared identity. And all that fits up nicely with human ethno-linguistic groups, and not, as far as I know, but some of you may know differently, for many other creatures. Of course, there are contrasts too. Okay, so sperm whale clans and human ethno-linguistic groups are more similar to one another than either is to a large scale societal structure of any other species. But there are contrasts. We've got about 12 distinctive behavioral attributes of sperm whale clans. And obviously there's countless for human ethno-linguistic groups. Timescales are probably different. The human ethno-linguistic groups have to be less than 350,000 years when we got language, but sperm whales came about 24 million years ago and haven't changed very dramatically in recent times, so probably a lot longer. But a really interesting and important difference is that in females, in both, as cooperative care of the offspring is really important, as pointed out by, for instance, by Newsom and Richardson in their book about human social evolution. But it now includes mature males, which, as far as we can tell, doesn't happen at all in sperm whales. So obviously these comparisons can be fraught. We can have anthropomorphism. And I really like Frans de Waal's anthropodenial, denying human properties to other animals. So I try and steer between these two. And a lot of what got me thinking about this was this wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything, by David Graeber and David Wengrow, which puts together a vast array of recent anthropological and archaeological evidence and uses it to say a lot of what people believed about human history and prehistory was wrong. And things are not as cut and dried as they were. And we should look more broadly at patterns of how humans can and did behave. So this was very controversial, and I put up these lovely pictures of the sperm whales, but it's actually not always like that. And there was a 2-week trip off the Galapagos. We were sailing around, and there were no sperm whales. We could not find a single one. And I was reading this book and getting more and more excited, and thinking, huh. And so here are a few of the things I came up with. How we can use some of these lessons they talk about when we think about sperm whale clans. Now, we biologists typically see resource acquisition as a major driver of evolution. And similarly, the human anthropologists, prehistorians, archaeologists think agriculture drove much of the complexity of human society. And they show that this is wrong as a universal process. There were complex foraging societies. There were simple agricultural ones. And so trying to look for too much ecological differences between clans may not be what we would expect to find, but it's worth looking, and we will. There's enormous variability in the nature and structure of human cultural groups. And we should expect the same with clans. And those few things I did comparing Atlantic and Pacific clans suggested that. And just as with humans, we've learned a lot by comparing what happened in Africa, Eurasia with North and South America, sort of two independent sets of human social evolution. With the sperm whales, we can compare the Atlantic, Pacific, and beginning to with the Indian Ocean. And then we can look at sort of strange isolated instances. So we've learned a lot about human evolution from Australia and totally cut off what happened there in this different environment. Similarly, we're beginning to learn quite a lot about sperm whales from the Mediterranean, which is pretty much totally cut off from all the other sperm whales. And they do things differently in the Med. Vocalizations and behavior, they suggest that ethno and linguistic do not always line up too well. There are societies which speak the same language but do things very differently, as we find in Northern Ireland, or have a common set of other behaviors but speak different languages, maybe the Ashkenazi Jews. And so we might expect find clans with similar dialects but distinct physical behavior, or vice versa. Gender. So one of Graeber and Wenner's points is that in human societies, it wasn't just males. Females had a major role in driving societal organization, leading societies, and in innovation. Well, in sperm whales, it's the other way around. We have assumed the societies and cultures of sperm whales are driven by female behavior, and maybe male sperm whales have more to offer than sperm. And I did a count, and I think there's by a factor of 5 more recent papers on female sperm whales than male sperm whales, and I am to blame for some of that. So we now have a new PhD student starting to look at the males. And this is a wonderful word that I got out of the book, schismogenesis. Humans, individually or as groups, define themselves against one another. And so interacting groups deliberately adopt strongly contrasting behavior. They talk about neighboring groups, one which holds slaves and the other seem to not hold slaves, as a deliberate saying, we are not like them. And certainly in the current situation here in Canada, we're doing a lot of things to show we're not like another country. And so that's schismogenesis. And I wonder if this may happen in other animals. And this is going beyond symbolic marking. You're doing something deliberately to show yourself different. And one of the most distinctive differences between the clans is in this movement. And there's almost no overlap between them. And I just wonder if the regular clan, the one on the right, is deliberately wiggling about and going slowly to say, we're not like those +1 ones who just steam through the ocean. Probably not, but I think we should think about these things. When I first showed these ideas to my colleague Luke Rendell, he said, "Oh, yeah, this is all very interesting, but who's it for? It's just us, just you and me, and our students will be interested in this." So I thought about that and tried to think about going the other way. Now, I don't suppose the anthropologists are going to be super interested in sperm whales right now, but I would like to spark a little bit of interest. So there's all kinds of suggested drivers of social complexity in both humans and sperm whales, that they have these complex, detailed societies for all kinds of different reasons. So I'm thinking, given the parallel between the clans and the human ethno-linguistic groups, we can look what is in common. And what is in common are mobility. Humans are mobile, sperm whales are mobile. There's a lot of cooperation, especially in bringing up the young. They have very large and complex brains, and they have the capacity of culture. So these would be the features that I think maybe we should concentrate on a bit more. So that's it. Just in conclusion, sperm whale clans have many members and cover large areas. They have distinct cultural behavior. They delineate social relationships and are perhaps most comparable to human ethno-linguistic groups as anonymous societies. The understanding of human social evolution can guide the study of sperm whale traits, and in the other way around, the traits that the two species share, perhaps candidates for drivers of large-scale social structures. And I'd just like to thank all the crew who spent the months and months at sea, the graduate students who spent years and years analyzing the data, and especially those 6 people at the bottom who have commented on these ideas and told me what they think. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hal. That was really a fascinating talk, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. This is hopefully, I think we're going to have a great discussion. So I'm just going to remind people that If you have a question, please post a question mark in the chat, and I will introduce you to the speaker. And also, if you have a question, if you're coming from YouTube, please post your question. I think Adriana is monitoring it for me. Is that correct? Thanks, Adriana. And also, when you ask your question, those of us, please make sure you just state your name and also where you're coming from. We're trying to build community to get to know each other. So at this point, Hal, do you mind unsharing your screen?
Unshare my screen. Yeah.
And I'll just warn you, my internet connection is a little unstable today, but hopefully there won't be a problem. But we'll get started. And our first question is from Eduardo.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Hal. Yes, I was jumping to ask a question. So actually, but I'm going to ask two questions, and you get to decide which one you answer. Either you need to give us something about the males, or you have to agree to present next fall the other 50% of the society, which is the males. I study peer living, so your choice, or maybe you'll do both. You'll give us a tip for now, and you'll tell us the male story in the fall.
Well, I'll give you a very short summary of male life, and we actually don't know too much more. But and maybe if you're going to invite me, maybe wait a year till my student Christine has figured out all kinds of things about them, because that will be very cool. So the male is born into the social unit, takes an active part in the social unit. He will babysit his siblings, his nephews, nieces, so on. He's a fairly normal part of the social unit, makes the same codas that everybody else does. And then about age 10 or so, he starts to become a bit more distant from the other members of this social unit. If you then start drawing the network diagrams, he's going off on the side. And then he leaves. And it's unclear how much that's due to urges within him, or the female saying, "We've had enough of you, you're a smelly teenager, off with you." But he moves, and he moves away, and he makes his way to higher latitudes. And so these sort of literally teenage males can be found in places like here, off Nova Scotia, off southern Japan, where they've been studied in a fair amount of details by Hayao Kobayashi. And there they form what the whalers call bachelor groups. So they're nowhere near as big or as complex as the female groups and social units, but they are social. They do spend quite a bit of time with each other. Then they grow, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So a full-size male is 3 times the mass of a female. And as they get bigger, they move to higher and higher latitudes. They become less and less social. So Hayao has studied probably 20-something males on average off northern Japan, and they are still social, but much less so than the younger ones in the south. And then when they become really big, they spend a lot of time in the high Arctic, Antarctic, mostly alone. And these are enormous, very peculiar animals, because now their spermaceti organ, their nose, is now a third of their huge body rather than a quarter in the females. Then it's thought at about age 27, they start coming down to the tropics and joining the females to mate. And the whalers saw this and immediately proposed a harem system. One big male, a bunch of females around. They've been at sea without female company for years, and so it really appealed to them. But and that actually was in the mathematical model the International Whaling Commission used. It had a harem reserve ratio in it. But when we started following them, it wasn't like that at all. We follow the group of females, the male comes in, and sometimes they're overjoyed. They're all over, they're touching him, the calves are playing in his mouth and so on. And sometimes he comes in and they all just dive. He's left there, and you think, poor guy, he swam all the way from Greenland and they have no interest. So it looks to me like female choice is a big thing there, which is really weird for an animal with such extreme sexual dimorphism. So there's a lot of puzzles, and we don't know how often they come down, how long they come down for, anything like that. So a lot to learn.
Thank you so much. I'll follow up. I'll email you to get Christine's full name and email.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so our next question is Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony DeFury from the Department of Anthropology at UT Austin, and Hal, yes, there are anthropologists that are interested in non-humans, lots of us. Thanks first off for a fascinating talk. As you were talking, I was grabbing all of the references off of your slides and educating myself on how much I'm uneducated about cetaceans. So I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, because I've been thinking about this recently. You talked about the evolution of social complexity in sperm whales and other cetaceans and in humans. And maybe I missed this in the talk, but do you have a concise definition for social complexity? And I have been wrestling with how we can define that in any kind of way that's consistent across taxa. I mean, you pointed to a bunch of characteristics of human and sperm whale societies that, and then some of them that are in common, but those are very, the dimensions or the potential drivers of social complexity that you highlighted. There are things we're going to recognize as likely to be important because we're humans and because of our particular societies that we live in, and understanding social complexity in a taxon that's very, very different than ours. There's, at least it seems to me, there's the potential for social complexity that we just don't recognize. And so how you define complexity, I think, I'd like to hear a concise definition if you have one.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to do, as you point out, and different definitions highlight different things. Michael Weiss at the University of Exeter and I and some others came up with a method which we quite like, and he especially quite likes and has been using it to compare societies. And this is using mixture models. So you use mixture models to look at the different classes of, and to define the different classes of social relationship an animal has. And then social complexity is an information metric based on how varied the types of social relationships you have are. Now, there are problems with that, but that's the one I've been sort of on the sides of for a little while.
Right, and I appreciate that, and I know kind of your work in that area, Julia's work in that area. My question, I guess, is those mixture models are based on recognizing something about what an interaction or an association is between individuals, whether it's spatial, whether it's temporal, and for taxa that don't have kind of overt interactions with one another, that's a complex thing then to decide what data are going to contribute to the mixture model, right? That you're going to apply the mixture model to. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I think, and you're right. Again, I'd go back there to communication, so that the idea would be my idea, I don't know, it's Michael's or others, is to look at how the animals communicate, and because there has to be some form of communication, and then use the forms of communication to work out the classes of relationship. So that's the way I would go about it. But I totally realize there's so many other ways it could be done.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Good question.
All right, Adriana, you're next.
Okay. This is a question from YouTube. I have my question mark for later. So it's from Sandra Smith Aguilar. And it says, do you have any sense of differences in predation risk faced by the two clans? Can they face more predation risk and hence need to be more careful caring for offspring?
We suspect that might be the case, but we don't have any evidence for that. And we're particularly interested in this in relation to human predation. So we've looked at how the sperm whales reacted to human predation. And it's remarkable there isn't actually a good record, because the whalers wrote down everything they did when they suddenly came across these sperm whale groups. And so we can look at how the whales behaved, and they learned very quickly from each other new ways to try and avoid the humans. And I wouldn't be surprised if that differed between clans, but I don't know that at this point. For killer whales are the major natural predator, and the same may be true. There are different ways of defending themselves, and we have yet to pin down that this method is used by this clan and this one by that clan, because it doesn't happen all that often. So we don't see it much.
Okay. So there is a second part to the question that I'm going to ask. It says, have you looked at male variation in coda or motive? You used to know if it differs from variation among females. I would ask.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something we really want to look at and haven't looked at yet. And so that's one of the potential chapters of Christy, my new PhD student's thesis. They don't make many codas. The big males, even the semi-big males, don't make a lot of codas, but they do. And now we have these recorders all over the ocean picking stuff up, and so we need autonomous. We need probably AI devices to comb through, masses of recordings and say, oh, I found a coda by a male, and then we can do that. But it's an exciting thing. I'm longing to find that out.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, before I go on to the next, I just want to, I forgot to mention at the start of this, if you're a student and you have a question or a postdoc, please put an S or a P after your question mark. We really like to highlight your questions, and we'll prioritize you in the list. But so next is Barbara Koenig.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Barbara König from the University of Zurich. I'm interested in animal behavior. I'm retired since a few years. And hi, Hal, this was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. I struggled actually over the term of anonymous society. I haven't really thought about it, but I fully agree that we consider societies as individualized. And you defined or said at the beginning, they have to individually recognize each other. And I fully agree this need not necessarily to be the case. On the other hand, we have groups like many fish swarms, which I considered still as anonymous, because maybe group size is more important than group composition. And that's for me the basic difference. It does not necessarily matter who is next to you. But in what you called anonymous societies, it matters, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I would not, I mean, for me, emotionally, that's not an anonymous society. I don't have a better term here, but I just wanted to maybe hear your opinion about that, because for me, anonymous means it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And here, as long as it is a fish of my own species or a mammal of my own, in mammals, I can't think of a very good example at the moment. But here in these societies, you have these identities, even if it's not individual recognition. So maybe it's worthwhile thinking about, or it's only my limited understanding of what anonymous means.
I see your point, and Mark Moffat goes into some of that, I mean his definition of society doesn't fit those what you would call an anonymous whatever group society. But if you take his definition, which I think is useful because it does distinguish it from group or social structure or some of the other terms we use. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have to be society, but I think the idea of a population being divided into segments, and the segments know who's in their segment and who is not, is very important for many areas of animal behavior, for culture, for population biology in terms of, but potentially in terms of mating opportunities and so on. So I think it is an important idea. I'm not dreadfully wedded to his terminology, but having criticized Harford's definition, I didn't feel I really wanted to go after the bits I really did like.
I take it like that. Maybe we could at some stage, yes, exchange. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we have Volker.
Oh, hi, hi Hal, Volker Deke from the.
Oh, well, hi, Volker. Nice to see you.
So my specialty is killer whale vocalizations, and so really cool to see it all laid out like this, and those parallels with the human cultures. Absolutely fascinating. My question is, well, two questions really, if I may. First question is, how far can sperm whales hear each other's codas? I know that the echolocation clicks are really loud. Are the codas audible over considerable distances, or is it more a within group kind of communication signal?
That's a very good question. It's something Peter Madsen and his group have recently looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's somewhere intermediate. It's about 5-10 kilometers probably, maybe 10's pushing it. But what it means is, I think, is that they are mainly used for within unit, within group communication. But if two groups of different clans approach one another, as they approach one another, they will start hearing the codas of the other one and then realize that's us, that isn't us.
Mm-hmm.
So that isn't happening at very long distances. And there may be other ways they can recognize who's in their clan at longer distances. But yeah, it's that sort of range. It's not going to keep them way away from each other, just but from the coda. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really helpful. Second question, hopefully quite quick. You mentioned that mating does occur across clan boundaries. Does it occur preferentially across clan boundaries, or do we know anything if there are, preferential associations for mating, or if it's quite random?
Well, to answer your first question, the mating across clan boundaries comes entirely from genetics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we find individuals in different clans have very remarkably have similar nuclear DNA, and to get that in a case where there's good mitochondrial DNA separation, you have to have the nuclear genes flowing between the clans, and it has to be through the males. Whether it's preferential or not, I mean, the preliminary analysis we've done it's very strong. And I thought, oh, maybe it's preferentially, they just don't mate with their their own clan, or their clan doesn't want to mate with them. But we haven't done powerful enough studies to say that yet. And it'll be really, really interesting if we can get there.
I'm asking mostly because you have this beautiful parallel with the First Nations cultures on the west coast of Canada, where you also have a clan system.
Yes.
Clan, Raven clan, Fin Whale clan in some communities, and clan identity is transmitted by the maternal line, but the rules are very strong that someone from Eagle clan can't marry someone else from Eagle clan, but has to marry outside of their clan, and
And then same with your killer whales too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think John Ford kind of lucked out when he used that word clan. Because it is the parallels are striking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volker.
All right, so I'm going to go next to Zulema, but then after that, I've got a student question in the queue that I'll jump to. So after Zulema, I'm going to go to Will. So please, Zulema, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Hi, I'm Sulema Tang Martinez. I'm retired from the University of Missouri in St. Louis. And I had a question, and I realize I'm still confused. A question similar to what Barbara asked. Throughout the talk, I was assuming, perhaps it was an assumption and you didn't say it, but it sounded to me like you were saying that they do have the ability to recognize each other individually. But then in your conclusions, if I read it correctly, you seemed to say that they were anonymous. And I realized that, the clans, okay, let me back up. I assume that in the units within the clan, they can recognize each other individually, but is what you're saying that between those units, they do not recognize each other individually?
Between some units.
Okay.
The way it works is there are some units who spend quite a lot of time in the same area and often form groups together. And I strongly suspect, and actually we do know in a few anecdotal cases, that individuals from the different units really like each other and spend time together. So so certainly within the units that they must know everybody. Between units, some not of the same clan. But between other units of the same clan, for instance, the shore clan is right across the Pacific. There will be units out there that have never got anywhere near each other, and there are others which might run into each other, but haven't been near each other for a long time. So you're right, it is a supposition, is that those units, members of those units, will know the other unit is a member of that clan. They won't know the individuals in the other unit. It's just because the numbers are too big. If there are 20,000 individuals, it's like, if we take the dangerous human road, that we know the members of our family, maybe the members of our village. But if we're a resident of Montreal, we don't know all the other where some people are English speaking, some are French speaking. We don't know all the other English speakers or all the other French speakers, but we do know they are an English speaker or a French speaker as soon as they open their mouths. So that allows us to an anonymous society to work.
Okay, so essentially, if I understand what you're saying, what we really have is like a mixture of a society, if we can use that word, according to the definition you gave. You have a group where there is individual recognition in parts of the associations that you see, but you don't have individual recognition in other.
Exactly.
Correct? Okay.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay. That helps. I have a couple of questions and they're very short. Do you see any, I mean, you talked a lot about cooperation and that's what we usually think about with social whales, but do you have any evidence of any aggressive behavior occurring?
Almost none for females. And we've spent a lot of time with them. And the whalers also would say that. They never see it. There is a small amount of evidence for aggressive behavior between breeding males. And I have seen it just once in 40 years at sea. And it was a bit like a sumo match as two enormous males grappled for a few seconds and then one ran off. So yeah, I think the ocean is not well structured for competition. So it's very hard to keep control of anything in a fluid three-dimensional environment. And so, there will be, we assume, some scramble competition where, there's a limited food source. But even that, we find limited evidence for. When I look at feeding success with group size, it increases with group size up to about a size of groups of size 40. That's a lot of sperm whale. And then there's an indication it declines after that. So there may be some of that going on, but mostly there's little to compete for. It's a cooperative environment. So yeah, very little aggression. And
yeah, so in the Caribbean groups where you saw like one clan and then suddenly there's a gap and then the clan from the north continues on in the south.
Yes.
Do you think that's just an avoidance that the new group comes in and somehow assesses the situation and says, yeah, this is fine, and then the others avoid? Or because
there may be some of that. We looked at possible environmental drivers of the differences, and we could not find any oceanographic feature or anything like that. It seems to be kind of the best explanation statistically, which would be translated into the statement, this is an island where we hang out. That's an island where they hang out. And so, you can see that self-perpetuated. If it's where you hang out, you get to know about it. You know the good places and how things work. And you might occasionally go over there and see how it is over there, but you don't really know how. And there's these other whales over there who are experts. And so that's perhaps how it perpetuates itself.
Yeah. And then the last question, you mentioned males coming in, and you mentioned that the older males, which are huge, are up further north. And that, in some cases, the females accept the male coming in, and in other cases, they just dive away from it. Is there any evidence that larger or older males are more likely to be accepted rather than the smaller, younger males?
No. But that's anecdotal too.
Yes.
But especially in the Caribbean, where Shane Giro and his colleagues have looked in, they know the whales there pretty well. They don't have they do have a few males these males have been back a couple of times, and they're generally seen as popular males. The females like them. But I don't think they've seen that they are the very biggest or the something elsest.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much. It was really fascinating.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to Will, our student, with a question.
Hi, Hal. Thanks for the great talk. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm a PhD student at Yale University under Vanessa Ezenwa, studying African buffalo behavior and infectious disease. I use studying animal societies or book like, nearly every day of my life. So thank you. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was stemming from that previous question. Have there been any kind of playback experiments where you show codas from opposing or opposite clans to these whales, and what is the kind of mechanism to reinforce, being with these groups? And maybe coming from that, is there kind of like an optimal group size? You pitched this idea in the very beginning, right, with like the allosuckling and then the group defense of offspring at the surface that, enforces like a lot of reciprocity potentially of like who's going to be there to protect your offspring or to suckle them. And I was just wondering what kind of mechanisms actually reinforce that for the females.
Well, people have tried playback experiments, which, as you know, have been so informative for all kinds of, obviously particularly birds, but also for mammals as well. But it's logistically quite hard. And although I've been involved in a few of these things, and we've never got clear, convincing results out of any of the playback experiments, and except possibly when we're looking at their reaction to anthropogenic noise. So that kind of works. You play something nasty and they don't like it. But as far as playing back their own sounds, it has been fairly disappointing. And part of that you can put to the logistic differences of trying to sound like an animal who makes the loudest sounds of any animal in a difficult environment. And I think what it probably relates to is generally we don't fool the whales. They hear it and they say, God, I don't know, I'm now being very anthropomorphic. Those stupid humans are trying to sound like us. It doesn't trigger the response. And another aspect of it is, I suspect that responses are extremely varied. As you listen to their natural codas, it doesn't necessarily mean you hear this coda and this happens or so on. So it's tough, but obviously, it would be lovely to play back the sounds or codas from one clan to another clan, see what happens. But it hasn't worked yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to step a little bit for Lauren because he had to go out a little bit for a second. And it's my turn to ask a question. So thank you, Hal, for such a great talk. And my question is mostly conceptual. I got confused now with the definition of a society. So in your slide, you have groups or group of individuals and so on. And we've been discussing the symbolic markers, but can we just pair up a society with a single group? So a single group could be a society. And then if we have more than one group, then will that make it a multi-level society? And so everything that it's more than one group will become something different? Or yeah, I guess it's more along those lines on like, how do we define a society? Because just defining a group, which I had to do it once for a paper we wrote on why groups matter for conservation. And then the reviewers asked like, yes, but first you need to define what a group is. And we had a lot of trouble trying to do it. And now, like, if you compare society with groups, then I think it's become a little bit more complex. I don't know if you have thoughts about it.
Well, I think that is one of the reasons Mark Moffat originally put the territoriality into his definition. It does make it simpler because you've got the territorial boundaries and you've got the individuals there, and do they know they're different from the individuals over there? But when you take the territoriality out, as we would like to, and I think makes sense for, there's all kinds of what I would think of as human societies which aren't territorial, like the Roma, for instance, or the Jewish diaspora, or something like that, then it becomes more complicated. And I think you've hit on one part of it. What if everybody, if you've just got one? Isn't that the question? If you've just got one group, and what is it? Is it a society? Well, I think if there's no other individuals of that species on Earth, then it probably isn't. But if there are, say you take up people living on a very small island and they know each other, and there is the potential that someone else will come in and they will know that person is not a member of their society. So that fits the definition.
Okay, so could we say that a society may be defined by this symbolic marker in that case? So it doesn't really matter anything in relation to territoriality or perhaps identity, like individual identity, as long as the group on its own has a marker that defines and make it different from other groups.
Well, by Moffat's definition, you can do it that way, or you can do it the individualized society, where you do know all the these are the members of my society. Everyone else, whether I know them individually or not, is not. And that is, I think, seen as the general situation certainly in some primate societies, that the individuals know all the members of their society, and they know who isn't in their society. And so that's individualized, because all the internal ones, you know them individually.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that case, there doesn't have to be a symbolic marker.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know them individually, you have to have some way to know you're a member of your society or a member of the other one. So you need something, and that is the symbolic marker.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
And now we've got a question from Julia.
Julia left. I'm back, Adriana.
Oh, Julia left. Okay,
Julia
Lauren,
left.
you're back.
So we'll go to Susan, please. And thanks for covering for me, Adriana.
Hello, Hal.
Hi.
As always, I'm just so impressed by the way you've been able to address some of the most difficult and exciting questions, at least to me anyway, regarding social evolution, and while working on one of the hardest to study creatures in the world. It's just mind-boggling. So I'm particularly interested in the evolution of the symbolic marker or the ethnic marker. So why should this have evolved? And if I recall correctly, in Richard McElrath's theoretical paper on the evolution of ethnic markers, he postulated that these should evolve only when there is some fitness-relevant variation in the essential components of the way different ethnic groups make a living, for example. And then you have dispersal of individuals from their natal group to places where they will encounter unfamiliar individuals from different ethnic groups, so groups that have different ways of making a living. And then they need to decide quickly with whom they can best develop productive social relationships. It could be regarding foraging, cooperative ways of making a living, or cooperative breeding, or something like marriage rules, sex roles in a marriage, or something like that. That will enhance their fitness. So in a way, ethnic markers are an essential part of a coordination strategy. So I'd like to know whether you see anything measurable about the different ways of life. So are there somewhat different foraging strategies regarding what they eat or how they get that food? Or are there norms of cooperative offspring care that are different, that are reliably associated with particular quotas? So in other words, why should it matter to them that they maintain these quotas that identify them as being part of a larger social unit, despite lack of interaction with most other members of this unit?
Good question. And yes, we have evidence for that. So that the two clans we've studied most move very differently. So as they, these are nomadic animals moving over large parts of the ocean, and they do this in very different ways. And we noticed, well, we didn't know about the clans when we collected much of the data, but when we're following the regular ones, they're wiggling about going this way and that way, and it's kind of hard to follow them. The plus one just keep trucking. And so that's a very different way. They also, in Maurizio Cantor's work, he shows that the way they synchronize their dives differs, and that relates to the effectiveness of babysitting strategies. So there are things like that, and I suspect there's quite a bit more that we haven't managed to get a handle on. And yeah, so yes, I think the answer is yes to your question.
In the Cantor thing, though, it seems like one group has a good way of doing it and the other one has a bad way of doing it. So why should the one that's doing it less effectively want to keep teaming up with those?
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes it is the what does Franz de Waal call it? The importance of just being recognized in the group. This is the way we do things. And because there's such benefits in doing things together, the fact that what we do together isn't always perfect, it's just better to do them anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so next in our list, I believe Adriana is YouTube. Got a couple questions there.
Yeah, well, I have a question from Juan Riquelme, and is how anthropogenic disturbances, such as noise, impact the behavior of sperm whales? Could they have disruptive effect on clan stability?
Yes, they could, but much more important are the effects of whaling. So in our area, well, the Galapagos area, there was very heavy sperm whaling until about 3 years before we started our study. And when we look at the genetic makeup of the units, it's much less matrilineal than the units we know from the Caribbean, where whaling is a more distant feature. So whaling seems to have affected the structure within the social units, and especially if the clans, as a previous caller, a previous question kind of suggested, or I suggested based on their question, adopted different strategies in relation to the whalers, then that could lead into in additional differences between the clans in other kinds of behavior. As far as noise, which the questioner mentioned, I think it quite likely that it would happen there too, because noise is a bigger and bigger deal. And those Caribbean clans live in a noisy environment. There are cruise ships going through, all kinds of speedboats, oil drilling, and so on. And but it's much less obvious to me how it will affect them, but I suspect it really does.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, should I ask the other one? Okay. So the other question comes from Meredith McQueenie. So Meredith, it's a PhD student working with Janet Mann, and she's wondering about the alloparental care behavior and if there are patterns of who provides care. And then a second question is there division of labor, and do we know anything about how that is balanced among group members, or perhaps through time over multiple codes?
Yeah. Yeah, there are patterns there. There are patterns such as females will, if two females have young calves at the same time, then they will often reciprocate care to each other. This is two females in the same unit, who are probably relatives, but so that happens. Both the babysitting and the allosuckling are more common. There is a kinship bias. So a calf is more likely to be suckled by a female who is closer kin than one who's further. The babysitter is more likely to be a closer kin than further. And there are some seem to be some compensatory mechanisms. So, for instance, in groups which are small and have few juvenile or no juvenile females, the juvenile males take a much bigger role in the babysitting than they do if they're a member of a big, more balanced group. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank the questioner.
I think that all the questions except for mine are taken care of. I don't see any in there. It's hard to follow with all the comments. I think I'll ask my question, and then I think we're going to have to wrap it up. I have a meeting at 1 that I have to go to, unfortunately. But Hal, I just had a simple question. Who's talking in these groups? Is there like a chatty individual that's doing all the talking, or is some leader doing the communicating? Is there a lot of noise? Are they talking over each other? I'm just really curious about that dynamic.
That's a great question, and I don't fully know that. We have found very little evidence for leadership. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but we don't find much evidence for that. And I don't know if they're chatting. That's a good question. I'm sorry, I can't tell you that, but I'm going to be thinking about it.
Cool.
Hey, Lauren, I had said that I had some thoughts, but I don't know if there's time. Some more thoughts about the whole individual recognition versus.
Yeah, it's up to Hal. How are you doing? Do you want to have a look?
I mean, I'd kind of like to hear them, but I've got some illness in my family, and I'd kind of like to get back to them. I mean,
okay, you should.
I'm sorry.
No,
but if you
fine.
want to email me, I will respond with pleasure. If that's okay.